Trump has decided to fixate on Bernie Sanders, and he started to attack Sanders. Now, I look at this and think, you're defined by your enemies, right? Like, if Elizabeth Warren is fighting Pete Buttigieg, well, they're just fighting for fourth place. Ultimately, the real contest is going on in the first and second place, meaning Sanders and Biden, and the conflict that these two are having. The fact that they're having the conflict at all shows that the conflict is between them two. It's almost a self-fulfilling thing. The media looks at it. These two are clearly in the lead, and the public gets it in their heads. These two are in the lead. The fact that Warren, however, is going after or going back and forth with Buttigieg gets across where she is. I hope you understand what I mean. Buttigieg is eating into her numbers to some degree. At the very least, he was. As he was going up, she was collapsing. She had to engage and threw a punch at Buttigieg. She went after the wine cave. She was also going after him on the campaign trail. You are defined by your enemies. Trump, President of the United States, recognized what we've recognized for the past several years. Not only is Sanders electable, but he is probably the most electable person to run against Donald Trump. Trump is beginning to notice. As the primary states are coming in, I would imagine his advisors are telling him. He may even be seeing it for himself. News articles and whatnot are coming out talking about Sanders' strength in his case. So he recognizes, all right, I can't just focus on Biden anymore. So I am going to also now attack Sanders. This is Trump. Listen to what he says, though.
Crazy Bernie has condemned the U.S. military strike on Soleimani, the world's top terrorist. Think of it, the world's top terrorist. And we're having people like Nancy Pelosi, it's a real genius. Do you believe that one? Nancy, nervous Nancy. But here's a guy who slaughtered and butchered civilians all over, and military, whoever was in his way. And we have Bernie and Nancy Pelosi, we have them all. They're all trying to say, how dare you take him out that way? You should get permission from Congress. You should come in and tell us what you want to do.
The president is not a king. Just so we're very clear, the president is not a king. Yes, the president is supposed to get military. The military budget is through Congress. I mean, yeah, if the president, this argument of an imminent attack, and that's the catch. When Donald Trump was being interviewed about this, Donald Trump made the point, well, he was going to go after multiple embassies. Now, when Donald Trump said that, I could look at his face and tell he was lying. He made that shit up on the spot. Early on, when this was coming up, you could tell they were lying. They were using, quote unquote, imminent in a political sense. Goebbels would have been proud of Trump using imminent in that term, essentially using the opposite, meaning their use of imminent was effectively the opposite of what the actual term meant. There was no imminent attack. There wasn't anything like that. The president of the United States, Donald Trump, decided he wanted to murder somebody who was a functionary of another person's state, meaning a person who was a head of that state, or a head. And I'm not saying the leader of the state. I'm just saying in the top government of that state, a general, a war hero, a defeater of ISIS or fighter of ISIS. And yes, pushing back the United States when it illegally and criminally invaded Iraq. I hope you understand what I mean by this. He was the head of state. If it's fair game to take out Soleimani, then every head of state is fair game. The notion that the guy had blood on his hands, are you telling me that Trump doesn't have blood on his hands? When Donald Trump first got in office, if you remember, one of the first missions went awry and all of those people were killed, many of which were women and children and civilians. That's called blood on your hands. All of the U.S. presidents have blood on their hands. Pompeo has blood on his hands. Bolton has blood on his hands. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? The guy is a general in the military. We used to, at the very least, have a common respect to acknowledge that the person was a general or was something in another, functioning in the capacity of another military. Now we call them terrorists. Trump uses the term terrorist, again, in a political language, political casting. It is illegal under our laws to do assassinations. When Obama killed bin Laden, there's an awesome piece in the New York Times where it goes through his legal reasoning for it, how all of these lawyers were coming together in order to create legal reasoning and justifications for even the killing of bin Laden. He had no justification for this. He just did it. The imminent threat thing was something that they were using to try to come up with this notion of, here's our justification for it. When Mike Lee and the other senators came out, they said this was the worst gig, this was the worst explanation that we've ever had. He said that I've ever had in my time in Congress. Lee, Republican, likes Trump, even within the talking about that, when he just went scathing rebuke of what they gave them, calling that some kind of briefing. Before he did it, he had his tongue firmly in Trump's ass. I guess my point is he wasn't doing this for political hit points. He was doing it because he looked at this and said, you just murdered a head of state for another country. And this is a massive, massive deal. And the media should be treating it as such. The media asks questions in this kind of way of as if their instincts say, well, yeah, we think this is a big deal. By the same token, we have an American perspective on things, and we don't particularly like Iran, so we're not going to make a huge deal out of it. But we're going to ask questions that get across the problem with this. Trump is lying here. Trump always lies. So that's not necessarily new news. Take a look at Pompeo. Again, imminent threat. That's their argument. That was an imminent threat. Trump goes further and says they were going to take down 4 embassies. They're going to take down 4 embassies. This is Pompeo. Pompeo is the guy working for the CIA, head of the CIA at one point. And he said, I was trained to lie, cheat, and steal. That was my job. The catch is Pompeo doesn't lie all that well. Listen to what Pompeo says here. Pompeo impeaches his own testimony.
Well, I got lots of different feedback from the briefing. I was there. I was one of the briefers. I thought we did a dynamite job. I mean that in the truest sense. If we did our level best to present them with all the facts that we could in that setting, in a closed setting, more than we can frankly say on your show today.
But Vice President Pence said to reveal more, the compelling intel could have compromised sources and methods, Mr. Secretary. Does that mean that the intel briefers in this administration don't trust Congress with classified information? Because that's what it sounded like.
But we shared.
Basically, they haven't given Congress anything to justify this notion of imminent threat. And even she's like, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me that you can't even reveal this to Congress? Ultimately, the Trump administration is effectively saying, trust us. That's what he's sitting here saying. Trust us. We can't reveal it. It's imminent, but we can't reveal it. Just trust us. This is one of the most deceitful administrations that has ever occupied this office. And that is including with Bush. That's including Bush. And the catch here is they don't do it well. They don't do bad things well. Listen to this.
An awful lot with them yesterday. There are things that only certain members of Congress get to hear, and I know Senators Lee and Paul care about this a great deal. They want to protect the prerogatives of the legislative branch. They have a view of the War Powers Resolution. I think members of Congress get frustrated by this sometimes. And so this wasn't political in the Republican-Democrat sense. This was executive legislative. And so I think there are a number of people who are using this as a political axe to grind. I think that's most unfortunate. There is no doubt that there were a series of imminent attacks that were being plotted by Qasem Soleimani. We don't know precisely when, and we don't know precisely where. But
there were a series of imminent attacks. We don't know precisely when, and we don't know precisely where. What's wrong with that statement? Think about it for the moment. What's wrong with that statement? Let's go into the term imminent. Imminent is a temporal term. By temporal, I just mean it relates to time. It's something that is going to happen in a short span of time. That is literally what the word means. Imminent. It's going to happen almost immediately. It's a short span of time, duration of time before something takes place. We got to act. Ticking time bomb. But to turn around and say we don't know where and we don't know when, also temporal. Now, temporal in the sense that when is a point in time. The two things conflict. We don't know when and we don't know where, but it's imminent. We know that much. That statement doesn't make sense. It's an imminent attack, something that's going to happen almost immediately, very soon. But we don't know when it's going to happen. So wait, is it imminent or you don't know when it's going to happen? I mean, if you don't know when it's going to happen, how can you say it's imminent? They're making this shit up as they go along. That's Pompeo. Listen to Defense Secretary Esper. Interview. Trump says they're going to knock down multiple embassies.
Attacks against against additional embassies.
Trump, they're going to attack multiple embassies. All right. Well, if they're going to attack multiple embassies, okay, why do you think this? And, is there something to back this up? Well, let's talk to the defense secretary. We heard Pompeo essentially talking out of his ass, lying through his teeth. What about the defense secretary? Is he going to lie for Trump?
Why was there a difference?
What the president said was he believed that it probably and could have been attacks against additional embassies. I shared that view. I know other members of the national security team shared that view. That's why I deployed thousands of American paratroopers to the Middle East to reinforce our embassy in Baghdad and other sites throughout the region.
Probably and could have been. That sounds more like an assessment than a specific, tangible threat with a decisive piece of intelligence.
Well, the president didn't say there was a tangible, he didn't cite a specific piece of evidence. What he said is he believed.
Are you saying there wasn't one?
I didn't see one with regard.
Right there. I didn't see one. I'm not going to lie for him. The president said he believed that there probably and that there could have been. And she says, so wait, there was a specific piece of intelligence? Well, I didn't see it. I mean, but, the president believed and, probably and could have been. That sounds different from imminent. That sounds a lot different from imminent. Because the imminent thing was nonsense. It was BS. It was ludicrous on its face. They were lying through their teeth as they were saying it. The political language was dripping off of it from day one. Imminent attack. Terrorists. And anybody, rational human being, looking at this says, this guy's a head of state. And if he's a terrorist because he was pushing back a foreign invasion force that was coming into a side, or at that point, a country that was invaded by various elements, well, everybody's fair game then. Think of all the military incursions the United States has been engaged in. And let's be very clear. We invaded Iraq. We ended up killing 1 million people. 1 million people died in that country as a result of our actions in that country. Not to mention the refugees, not to mention people who were maimed, not to mention people, doors kicked in, families, civilians. I mean, the notion, and don't misunderstand me, people who have lost limbs, have lost family members in that country, I can absolutely understand, or at the very least, I can empathize in anger associated with it. But I would make the point to you that the anger is not honestly at Iran, or for that matter, the anger is not even at Iraqis who were defending their soil against a foreign invader who came in yelling and lying about weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. Your argument, your anger should be leveled at your government for sending your particular person over there in order to fight in that war. Trump is lying. Depending on, we don't know anything about those embassies. And Pompeo, who has an imminent attack, but he doesn't know when that immediate attack is going to take place. They're lying. We've just murdered a head of state. And I don't know what's more terrifying, that the media is not more outraged, or that the media is not more hair on fire about this, and the token gesture of Congress to pretend as if they're against this, by Democrats pretending they're against it. This is a terrifying outcome. And I know there are a lot of people who support Trump and think that this is a win. I'm sorry, this is not a win. There are tens of millions of people in that country and across the world that hate your guts after this. The missile attack, it's not their attack. Meaning the missile attack that hit that base, yes, that is sent from Iran, but that is not the attack. Iran was never going to go mano a mano with the United States. They were never going to, we're going to meet you out back in the schoolyard. The United States is this kind of jock with brass knuckles. Iran is not that jock with brass knuckles, and they would get punched in the face over and over again. Whether or not the United States could pacify it and hold it is a little bit different from the standpoint of them being able to blow shit up. That's not what they would do. No rational actor would do something like that. Yes, they would fire those missiles. Yes, they would alert the Iraqi base so the people can get out. And I would imagine they knew that they were going to alert the Americans. The actions that they took were token. They weren't necessarily done in a way of trying to kill Americans in response for the retaliation in that sense. They needed to do something, however, for their population that was in outright outrage. They were apoplectic and had every right to be. If that was us, even if it was somebody we didn't particularly like, if George Bush had been drone striked going to some country that he was invited in, we would be outraged. I don't know if I would have been that much outraged, but most of the country would have been outraged. They would have said, how dare you, even for George Bush. Even if it was somebody else, if they did Pompeo, we would be outraged. And yet this gets it's not American, it's fair game. What does this mean for other governments that we don't like? Venezuela. Well, Bolivia now, I guess you could say, is one of the liked governments. But we've just assassinated a head of state brazenly and openly. And the people who are supposed to come out here and back up the narrative and support the narrative are failing miserably at their jobs because ultimately, I don't even think they believe they need to support the narrative. The president of the United States took an action. That's all that's necessary. And all of these other people, the media is not going to overly push them on it. The media may just ask the question, but they're not necessarily going to overly push and engage. And so, yeah, this is what you get. This is what you get. My point, my basic point, is they were giving up the goods. They were lying from jump. They were lying from jump. Said they were lying from jump. Can't stand Pompeo. It's a disgusting human being. All right, let's see. Do I have another one? Wait, first, who's here? Trudy. What's going on, Trudy? That Red said they'll not be found undeclared wars. Let's see. Melissa Petrovic. Ah, thank you, Melissa. Cool Blue 71. In 2016, Bernie nationally won 17 of 29 primary voters with 70% to Hillary's 28%. He won them with over 80% in Iowa and New Hampshire, which set the trajectory of the race. And in it, Michigan, and a closed primary state, Pennsylvania. Cool Blue, look, I think he's going to overperform. The fact that, keep in mind what's taking place here. Sanders, who in 2016, they just said, oh, people were just angry at Clinton. That's why they were voting for Sanders. All right. Now you get into this race. And you have, 22 other Democrats in the race, including 2 billionaires. The 2 billionaires, one spent over $100 billion. The other one spent like $80 or $90 billion. And Sanders has been outraising everybody else in the race, despite being grassroots funded all throughout. Meaning he never took this extra money and dumped. He's been this way all throughout. And he's been able to outraise all of them. He has more money in the bank. He has more fundraising. He has larger crowds. And his argument is, look, the only way you beat Trump is by expanding the electorate. And that's what I'm going to do. Not just that, that's the only way for him to win. They think that's a risky proposition. That's not risky. That is his only path to victory. And so any polling agency that takes this into account, they can't take that. They're going to take their, whatever their metric is. If he's right and he overperforms, that number is going to be tremendous. I mean, right now, with the way they're looking at this race, he's still leading in Iowa. He's still leading in New Hampshire. And again, this is with 22 other people in the race. And with Warren in the race. Because Warren is eating into his numbers. Meaning there's a large percentage of people, the majority, would go to him if Warren wasn't in the race. So that's, in spite of her being in the race, he's still winning number one in Iowa, New Hampshire, and in many other polling that came out, number one in California. Look, I told you, I think he can win this thing. And these guys are waking up to something that I thought was clear as day from early on. The public wants something fundamentally different. And you had a situation where the Democratic Party lost all sorts of legitimacy in that 2016 race. Not to mention, talking about we can lie in court and all this other stuff. Those things have consequences. You had a progressive or a lefty group within the party that took this opportunity to challenge this hegemonic norm within the party. It was challenged in 2016, and the residents of 2016, almost like the fall of Sparta 300, where even though he lost, for the most part, he stayed relevant and he maintained and kept going. He never stopped. That momentum just carried on back into the 2020 race. And for all those people who thought, he's not going to keep that support stayed. His thing is increasing his numbers. Melissa Petrovic, thank you, Melissa Petrovic, and Trudy. What did you say, Trudy? Right here. The Reds said that they will not fund undeclared wars. The resolution said they would not fund undeclared wars. Oh, right. Well, their issue here is that Trump goes and kills Soleimani. Well, what do you think Iran's response is going to be? Just logically. I mean, what would your response be? You're a human being just like they are. You have a notion of national identity just like they do. And within the context of that national identity, national sovereignty, this notion that the state should be able to protect the citizens, but also this notion of just outright outrage that one country, whatever the country is, would outright and flagrantly murder one of its citizens in this way, especially one that is considered a hero. What do you think their reaction would be? The most logical reaction in the world would be for them to strike back in some way. Well, if they strike back in some way, what would the United States do? The United States, at the very provocation of hitting the embassy, turned around and murdered one of their citizens. Nobody died in that. Meaning nobody died in an embassy raid. It might have embarrassed you, but nobody died. So just because nobody died in the missile launch doesn't mean that the U.S. wouldn't behave in a particular way. The catch here is that Iran tips his hand when it notifies the Iraqi base. What I mean by that is they know that the Iraqis are working with the Americans. Those Iraqis would most likely notify the Americans because if anything happens and the Iraqis get out of Dodge, the Americans are going to turn around and say, you knew and you didn't say anything to us. We have all these people who are dead. Iran has to know that. They're rational actors. So the notification to Iraq, for the most part, tips their hand in regards to, we don't want anybody killed in this. We don't want to escalate. Let's just end this and let's call this shit a day. Now, that is a demeaning position for them to have to take. The missile strike, which came across as an act of strength, was really just an act of weakness. It was the best that they could do. Some, a flaccid response. But again, they're rational actors. Their objective is not, we're going to meet you out back and we're going to have it, on as a 101 in front of the world stage. That's not what they want. And if they can help it, they're going to try to avoid it. But again, they may not be able to help it. In fact, of the matter is, the issue that Congress has is you're going into this all on your own, entirely undeclared. You're starting a war. Cool Blue 71, 18 to 29 year age group is the first carried by Democrats in the general election. John Kerry is the last to lose the popular vote. The only age group that he won was 18 to 29. This is partly why Democrats blew it. Hillary in 2016. Well, you see Sanders is getting that vote. In 2016, Sanders was getting like 70% of that vote. In some of those states, 80% of the vote. It was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. Look, I look at this, and the biggest hurdle for Sanders is the primary. It's just this. The Democratic Party is going to throw everything at the wall to stop him. Once he gets out of it, then this question becomes, who do you hate more, Trump or Sanders? You have nowhere else to go. We're back to that argument, but in reverse. The catch here is, I think he pulls people into the electorate. And I think this message, meaning your material interests, I think it affects people, especially when they start believing, well, wait a minute, this guy is right. We can make policy. We are a democratic country. We can make these policies that are in our material interests. Tony Monk, maybe we could trigger him. Then you control him and see. Fred Edwards, the Trump administration listed Iran's Revolutionary Guard as military. Oh, their military as terrorists. Yeah, he did. After pulling out of the JCPOA, he ends up listing them as a military. He ends up pulling military assets in that particular region of the world. He ratchets up sanctions. He starts seizing their ships. For fuck's sake. These are policies that he chose to take. Nobody forced them. He chose it. Philip Blair. We need the voting age to be 16, like Austria. This year, or this election, is going to be the first election, if I'm not mistaken, where the youth vote is going to be the most. Sanders has to get something out of Biden from the elderly vote. I think in one of those polls, he was getting like 5% of the vote over 60. It was extraordinary. I missed your super chat, Marcus. Hold on.